This is Far From Home. I'm Scott Gurian. So, as I record this, I'm in the midst of making some last-minute travel arrangements for a big trip I'm about to embark on to North Africa and Southeast Asia for the next month, where I hope to find some interesting stories. And for those of you who heard my recent episode I co-produced with Planet Money about my friend Araz from Turkmenistan, I'm also working on a story updating all of you on his journey to the United States. But in the meantime, I wanted to pop into your feed today to share another podcast I discovered recently that I think some of you might like. It's called Off the Beaten Jack, and it features Jack Boswell, a 31-year-old British guy who decided last winter to quit his job he hated and book a flight to the U.S. to pursue his dream of being a screenwriter in Los Angeles. But instead of just flying directly there, he chose instead to start his journey in Boston and make his way across the country by rail, documenting the places he went and the people he met along the way. We'll hear more from Jack in a minute about the inspiration behind his show. First, here's an excerpt from his episode he filed from aboard an Amtrak train in Wisconsin after having just received the news that his laptop computer, which he depended on for nearly everything, was on life support.
It had been a frustrating, expensive, and rather lonely week. After I settled into my seat on the train, I wandered into the observation car, in search of company as much as someone to interview. And immediately I was pulled into a ragtag group who were drinking away the evening, including, but not limited to, a grizzled writer for motorcycle magazines.
I also race cars.
A free-spirited hippie-ish woman.
I'm going to just say a little comment about everything going on.
And a 19-year-old Amish kid taking the train for the first time.
We raised cattle, raised corn, we built sheds in the summer.
And after full starts talking to all of them, we were joined by Matt, a charismatic bartender from Portland, Oregon, who was traveling back from Michigan, with whom I struck up a bond over a mutual love of the sitcom Frasier. And although on the face of it, Matt was the most well-adjusted and therefore least interesting subject, I found myself gravitating towards him. He was a calming presence amongst the chaotic energy of so many competing personalities, and as we shared a drink together, he opened up to me about his life and the period of change he was going through.
So you live in Portland full-time, but are planning to move, right?
Correct. I've lived there since 2017. I had always wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest. Something about it from about the age of 20, it fascinated me. I thought it was a politically left nature wonderland kind of thing. Because I've grown in Michigan, I had trees and I had beaches and I had all that, but it's a very conservative place to live. So I thought Portland could only be better. And it took me years and years to be able to live there until the girl I was seeing got a job offer and we went together. But I'm obviously not with the girl anymore. She would probably be right here.
Yeah.
And she'd be blowing your mind because she was cool German chick with a worldly life story, well-spoken. And so that's over. And now that coupled with a couple of professional failures, I'm in the restaurant industry, I'm just ready to leave it behind.
You can hear more of that conversation in episode 6 of Off the Beaten Jack, and you should definitely listen because it gets pretty interesting. I'm joined now by the show's host and creator, Jack Boswell, from his home in London. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little more about why you decided to make this podcast in the first place.
It's a good question. Most people, especially Americans, when I first told them, it was like, why would you travel through the middle? And, I had this plan. I was going to go to LA. I've always written comedy and I wanted to go there and pitch a couple of things that I'd written. But I've also loved traveling and I have a real love of small town America, and particularly the places in between the places that, we normally go to. And one of my favorite jokes actually is in The Simpsons when I think it's Ned Flanders says, this is the place between New York and LA called America. And that always stuck with me. And I have this real love of visiting small towns, and I've driven in America. Of course, it's the land of cars, but I'd never done it on the train, and there's this romance to it. So I thought instead of flying straight to LA, why not take the opportunity to stop in some places along the way?
It's interesting for me, even as an American myself, listening to it, like those of us who live kind of on the coasts or in Chicago or, the big cities, like there is this what they call flyover country that many of us either haven't been to or just haven't spent a lot of time in. I mean, the United States is such a big place, much bigger than where you're from, the United Kingdom. And so it's fascinating to kind of hear some of these stories and also to, hear them from your perspective as a total outsider. A lot of these places are somewhat foreign, even to those of us who live here, but especially to you coming from a totally different place and different culture.
Completely. Yeah. That's the appeal of it, really.
Is it fair to say, kind of from listening to your first episode, like you come from a little bit of an adventurous family, or at least your mother, I guess?
I guess so, yeah. My mom has traveled a bit. She actually started hosting couch surfers in our home when I was a teenager in our spare bedroom. So I got to meet all of these people that I would never otherwise meet. And she has a real traveling streak. She's far more adventurous than I am. I usually pick places where I know the language and people hear an English accent and they kind of like it. But she'll pick places that I've never been, or, way more adventurous.
And following in her footsteps, you decided to do a lot of your stays in couch surfing situations, like sleeping on people's couches, just random strangers you found on this website, and contacted them and said, hey, can I stay at your place, to really kind of get to know the people.
Yeah, I've done that a few times on trips now. And, it started off, when you're younger, it's an inexpensive way of traveling. Although, I do like to take people out or cook them a meal or say thank you somehow. But as I've got older, it's still something I love to do because you just meet real people. And so often when you're traveling, you can end up in a hotel or a motel or an Airbnb, and you really don't get the inside track at all. And so you get to have these connections, you get to stay in real homes. And, often it was people I didn't even meet through the website. I'd meet them, on the street or in the bar. So it's a great way of traveling, but it is very different if you're used to, staying in a comfortable bed the whole time.
And I love in your podcast just some of the conversations you've had with people you've met along the way. I mean, I've been a journalist for many years. I've been making my podcast, but I still find it incredibly hard to just strike up conversations with random strangers. You seem like you're really good at it. Like, does that come easy to you?
I suppose it does, but it helps that you're an outsider, I think. I'm a real creature of habit when I'm at home, and I do talk to people, but if you arrive in a small town in North Dakota or Montana and you open your voice and you have an English accent, immediately it's very easy to make friends. And I think that's part of the appeal. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche that Americans, not all of them, but generally quite like an English accent. So it certainly helps. But I don't know, there's just something about traveling as well that I think you become a lot more open because firstly, you don't know anyone. And I think it's a lot easier to have really heartfelt conversations with people you don't know and you might not see again. Although actually, ironically, I have stayed in touch with everyone that I stayed with. But I think traveling is really good for that. It just forces you to meet people, and traveling on your own as well. It would be very lonely if you went and never spoke to anyone. So yeah, I suppose I have got better at it.
Did you have any expectations going into this trip? Like of what America would be like or what sorts of experiences you might have?
I mean, I knew that I was going to meet people that I might not agree with or that I might have a very different life experience from. And I did. And sure enough, we still hit it off. We still had so much in common, which is a really nice thing when you travel somewhere. I expected that I would have certain experiences. I guess the kind of cliched one for non-Americans is being taken shooting. I had that experience. And then ones that I didn't expect that I would have, like touring someone's private marijuana basement where they grow vast quantities of weed. And so I was constantly surprised.
What would you say were kind of the biggest highlights and lowlights, I guess, of your journey?
I mean, the highlights, actually sitting on the train itself was kind of extraordinary because I had this image of Amtrak, and what's unusual compared to the trains we have here is that they're double height. And so you go onto the upper deck and you go into the observation car where I spent all of my time. I mean, I was in the cheap seats, but I would spend all of my time when I wasn't sleeping in this observation car, which has its windows on all sides. And you can sit there and look out and go down and get a cup of coffee or a glass of whiskey in the evening and just look out at the scenery going by. And it's a hell of a way to travel because especially, going through the Midwest, it's all snowy or it's all icy. When you start hitting the Pacific Northwest and then going south, when you see this changing landscape in a way that you just don't when you fly, or it's so quick when you fly, and you just see the snow starts to melt away and then the trees start to change and then it gets a little dustier and a little more orange as you kind of head towards the south. that was a real highlight. Just sitting on this train, looking at the world going by. I also didn't do an episode on it, but I got really into splitting wood in Montana. I stayed with some people. And this is another way that I'd like to travel more. I only did this once on this trip, is work away, which is where you go and you do a few hours work in exchange for having a place to stay. And they didn't have much to do in the winter except split wood. And it turns out that I love splitting wood. I've been born and raised in London, lived here all my life. But we would climb into this old pickup truck. We would drive to the lumber yard. We would toss all of these logs in the back and then drive back. And I would just wheel it into the yard and split wood for hours. And I was in heaven. There's something so therapeutic about it. So that was a real highlight as well. Lowlights, oof. It's funny. I mean, now when I look back on it, things that were lows are kind of fun retrospectively. So when my computer exploded and I got stuck in Wisconsin Dells for a week, staying in a grotty motel, it got pretty grating at the time, but now it's a great story when I look back on it. And I think so much of traveling is you get these stories which you can kind of dine out on for years to come. And, you know, when you're feeling a little stuck in other parts of your life and you're back home, you can cast your mind back and you're taken back there. But yeah, my computer breaking was pretty bad. Getting really ill was bad. This is my other expectation. I thought I might catch COVID at some point. I was certain I would have to quarantine at some point. And I didn't. As far as I'm aware, I didn't. But I got very ill at one point and I took a test and it wasn't. And someone said that I might have had mild frostbite of the lung from being outside in the cold too much. So that wasn't much fun.
So how long was your entire trip?
It was just under 3 months.
You spent 3 months going across the United States by train.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is the other crazy thing, is because I was able to be in the country for 90 days. And my plan was to spend a month traveling across and then spend 2 months in LA trying to schmooze and make connections. And I got so carried away traveling. You know, places that I would plan to stop for a couple of nights, I would spend a week there or 10 days there. So it just took over this full 3 months and I didn't even care. I was having such an incredible time meeting people that by the time I got to LA, it's like, well, the weather's nice, but you know, I felt like the adventure was behind me.
So you decided that the middle of the country is in fact more interesting than the coasts?
I mean, it's different. I wouldn't say it's more interesting or less interesting, but it's certainly less familiar to me. You know, you go to New York or you go to LA and they're great. They've got so much going on and amazing food, but big cities, whether it's Sydney or London or LA or Toronto or Hong Kong, they will all have lots of the same things. You know, I think being in small communities, they each have their own feel to them. And it's just so alien from what I normally know. And I love it. And I have a particular love of sort of Americana and, you know, Main Street and these places that I have in my head from films and things.
So you started out this whole journey and this whole experience of making this podcast with the intention to go to Hollywood, you know, try out screenwriting, but actually you ended up making this podcast and deciding that's kind of really what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I still have ideas. I still have scripts that I'm planning to come back to, but I've fallen in love with this as a form of talking to people. And what's funny, if you're listening to it as a travel series, I'm not talking that much about the places and giving you history. It's really just a medium of meeting people. And for me, that's half of what travel is the people. But it's just got me so into hearing people's stories. And then I came back and I got nominated for this award here, which was very flattering. And so I thought, well, I've got to keep doing this. I mean, I've been plugging away at screenwriting since I was about 17, so 15 years. And I found more enjoyment and more success in like 4 or 5 months of this than I ever did writing. Audio is such a great way of telling stories, and the crunch of footsteps and the sound of trains heaving into stations. I think half of the time I'd meet people just because I was wandering around with a microphone, with a Zoom recorder, just capturing sounds, and someone would pull up, you know, in a pickup truck when it was below freezing and be like, what the hell are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm just recording the sound of your Main Street.
So you're back in London now. What are you planning to do with the show next?
So I have actually just arranged to do a house sit. I'm going to be spending 6 weeks in a small town in Mississippi.
Wow. That's amazing. That's really immersion there.
It is.
Journalistic immersion.
And I'm not going with any intention or with any story or with any angle. My plan is just to go there and live in the community and interview as many people as possible and just try and paint a portrait of it for listeners. So one episode, I'll go to the barber's and get a haircut and interview the guy that cuts my hair. Then I'll go to a coffee shop. I'll go to church. I'll go to wherever and just see who I meet. That's next month, mid-November till the end of the year. So that will be an experience. I can't wait.
That's amazing. I'm really eager to hear what you think of small town Mississippi as an outsider coming in.
Yeah. Thank you so much for getting in touch. And if you ever make it over to London, then you're very welcome to come and stay on my sofa.
Okay, duly noted. Jack Boswell is the host and creator of Off the Beaten Jack. I'll leave you today with a sampling of the first season of his show. And if you enjoy hearing this, I encourage you to listen to the rest wherever you get your podcasts or at offthebeatenjack.com.
I wanted to ask if you had any tips for me traveling in your country.
Take care of yourself.
And by that, you mean buy a gun?
No, definitely not
buy
that.
2 guns.
Definitely not that.
Okay.
Or walk like you have one.
Deep in the middle of winter, I boarded a train in Boston and started winding my way across America. And though it was sub-freezing, there were plenty of warm welcomes. Here's a taste of the people who opened up to me en route. You're listening to Off the Beaten Jack.
I mean, do you want to give up drinking or not?
Unfortunately, I don't.
What do you think it gives you? What do you get out of it?
Ooh, not much. It's an escape. But not a proper one, you know? I don't wish this affliction on my worst enemy. A lot of people think that addiction, whether it be to drugs or alcohol, they think it's a choice. And if they haven't been through it or experienced it directly, they think it's something you elect to do to alienate the people in your life. And unfortunately, it's just something that takes you over. And because of that dopamine hit, prevents you a lot of times from making what would be ostensibly the right decision.
Through my hosts, I got to experience different ways of life, whether it was stripping off to stay with a nudist.
This is funny. I've never done a naked interview before.
Well, you came out of your box and out of your shell.
Out of my boxers.
Out of your boxers.
Or learning to count cards with a professional gambler and risking my own money in a daring casino caper. What followed was a flurry of bets. 50, 75, 50, win, loss, win, win. The count was high, and something told me I was about to get lucky with Lady Luck. I pushed forward $100. The dealer dealt me a jack and a queen against their 6. And then she drew a 5. But amidst the adventures, it always came back to the people I met and giving them space to tell their stories without judgment.
My mother, I mentioned she passed away, and the way that she passed away was she was murdered by gunshot. It's important to know that it didn't change my stance on guns at all. I started to see that it was the man who killed my mom and the actions he chose to take that made him do that. It had nothing to do with the guns, and I think that's a very significant argument in America today, is the gun rights thing.
And to someone that would say in response to that, if he hadn't had a gun, that might have changed things. Does that mean anything to you, or do you?
People like that, they're gonna want to kill whether they have a gun or not. He probably would have stabbed my mom, or he would have strangled her. And, you know, murderers are murderers. That's what they are.
There was no telling where I'd end up, like talking to a funeral director about meeting his wife on the job.
What could I say? It's a pretty unconventional way of meeting.
Yes.
It's not one you see in many romantic comedies.
No.
No, it is not.
I do remember meeting her. She came in that morning. She made a big impression on my coworker because she said, you're in trouble with her. She's got her eye on you. And I'm like, she's a widow. And she goes, I don't care. I see that. And Marilyn was correct.
Conversations covered everything from the immigrant experience and whether America is still the land of opportunity.
I think I've been part of the American dream in terms of working hard to try and make something happen, but it hasn't happened. So now I'm at this crossroads or changing point or whatever to try and figure something else out.
To what it's like for adoptive white parents raising black children in such a racially fraught country.
You know, do you anticipate there's a point where you're going to have kind of a different discussion with them than with their siblings? Given
we already have. Yeah.
Discussions about race, discussions about the way they will be perceived, discussions about what they wear.
This morning we had Watson take down. We did let him wear a hoodie this morning because it's kind of cold, but he couldn't wear the hood up.
Yep.
And in the end, the trip offered a chance to broaden my horizons and even take some uniquely American holiday snaps along the way.
We're going to have you stand like this, and I'm going to hold my American flag up behind you. 2 guns, one in each hand, one tucked in your pants, and I'm going to hold this behind you. Just tuck it in there. We want you to look gangsta.
I'm not going to shoot my dick off with this.
No, it's empty.